This is Amruth, and today I want to show how traditional Chinese medicine, a framework that has long been thought to originate in China, didn't just develop in isolation and wasn't a purely indigenous system. Specifically, I'll show how profoundly the Silk Road exchanges reshaped Chinese medical knowledge, especially with Eurasia, through the years 200 to 1600 CE. In fact, at least 235 medicinal plants, which in today's modern Chinese Pharmacopoeia, which is around 15 to 20%, were imported and adapted then into traditional Chinese medicine, or TCM. But the transformation from India or Persia didn't go just to simply like add new ingredients, but because of differentiating frameworks for illness categorization and treating, it forced a fundamental reconstruction of how Chinese physicians and medical excerpts kind of classified and treated illness. Specifically, Indian ophthalmological techniques had a huge influence, which is surprising considering like Confucian China as a place at a time that very highly valued bodily integrity and didn't want tools to penetrate the body, had immense influence on eye disease and eye surgery. And this matters in a broader scale because it reveals that tradition is just a modern political construct. Every single civilization, every single knowledge system is built from centuries of cross-cultural exchange, and for TCM, that has direct implications of how we regulate traditional medicine today, protect intellectual property, and evaluate medical evidence. So let me be clear about what I'm asking. So how did cross-cultural medical transmission along the Silk Road networks transform Chinese medical epistemology, the very way physicians understand disease and healing? So my argument is going to be structured in three parts. So first, historically. So Chinese medicine, like I said before, was fundamentally reconstituted through sustained Eurasian knowledge exchange. So like I said before, those like 235 imported species, the complete like reconstructing of eye disease ophthalmological classification and introduction of surgery, and overall systematic therapeutic transformation across multiple medical domains. But there's also a deeper theoretical point. So what we call traditional Chinese medicine is in a way an invented tradition, like I said before. Traditional Chinese medicine as a concept itself was deliberately consolidated and standardized by Mao State in the late 1950s, so very relatively recent. And it brings together these regional practices and creates this, or tries to create this unified national framework under the umbrella term traditional Chinese medicine. But the tradition we imagine as ancient or pure or like authentically Chinese is actually just a 20th century political label. It is so like distilled. It is a melting pot of so many different influences, so many cultures that that label and the Chinese claiming it is almost inaccurate. And this creates, in a way, a contemporary crisis. Modern governments have one side trying to preserve TCM as authentic cultural heritage while simultaneously demanding like biomedical validation, having it up to par with today's universal medical frameworks. But the problem is this medical system that was constituted and created through 2,000 millennia of very dynamic, very fluid exchange obviously cannot be frozen into an authentic form. It cannot be standardized, but simultaneously forced to satisfy foreign medical epistemological standards, which grow increasingly strict. And these demands fundamentally contradict each other. So now to make this argument, I'm drawing on multiple disciplines. This project is inherently interdisciplinary because one source, one category can't answer everything. For medical history, I'm building on work on gender roles, power roles, and medicine, especially Charlotte Furt's paper and her work. Also be talking about surgical and technology studies, so material objects, surgical instruments, drugs, recipes, and how they function as knowledge carriers across cultural boundaries. But the core analytical framework that I'm going to be using throughout this and return back to is the key insight that pharmacopoeas operate through feedback loops. Almost always, every time, every civilization, foreign substances enter local systems, they get reinterpreted within indigenous frameworks, within local contexts, and fed back into the global circulation where other traditions re-domesticate them again, and this creates this sort of multi-directional recursive exchange. There's not one-way diffusion at all. So again, now let me briefly outline what sources I'm going to be drawing for. So from a mixture of first-hand sources that I've seen firsthand, but also those I've read second-hand analytical pieces about. So Chinese medical classics like Li Xinzhen's 1596 Ben Kao Gang Mu, Buddhist texts like Longshu Pusayalun, which introduced Indian ophthalmology and surgery into China for the first time, as well as Duanhong manuscripts that are invaluable for their for how well they're preserved. Many also mix Chinese and Sanskrit terminology, showing that cross-cultural exchange. Further, Buddhist texts from India like the Sutra Samhita and its surgical protocols, and to get like a more broader global view of Silk Road and medicine in 1000 BCE Eurasia, more Arabic, Persian medical compilations, and archaeological evidence. So let's look at ophthalmology first, because it demonstrates not just how knowledge transfers, but genuine epistemological transformation. So a very fundamental, just complete restructuring of how physicians understood and characterized disease. In the Shang Dynasty, the first references to eye illness were found engraved in oracle bones, and they were due to angry ancestral spirits, according to physicians of the time. But by the Han Dynasty, physicians had moved more into philosophical, like yin-yang theory, but remained very physically symptom-focused, so like redness, pain, etc., with no surgical tradition or anatomical tradition whatsoever. Then, during the Sui-Tang transition, however, things changed. Buddhist monks brought Indian medical texts. Longshu Xilun describes actually 72 eye diseases organized by Indian tridosha frameworks, which includes wind, bile, and phlegm. Now, the crucial point here is that Chinese physicians, like I said before, can't simply add on this information to their existing knowledge. To show the categories and that framework doesn't map onto yin and yang systems very effectively, and overall their conceptual frameworks are just incommensurable and inconsistent with each other. So this kind of forced this slow but broad restructurization, creating this hybrid classification that synthesized both traditions. And this is what I mean by epistemological transformations: complete restructuring, but slow, restructure. And it's not just supplementation. But at the same time, this is just Samhita's cataract couching technique, which used a needle to displace optified lens, was adopted and became known as the golden needle method by the Song dynasty. So this is another example of how medical treatments, how technology adapts to cultural context, like I said before, with the feedback loops. And by the Song dynasty, ophthalmology emerged as a distinct medical specialty, and especially taking into concern the cultural context. Surgery, like I said before, had extraordinary low prestige in Confucian culture. Cutting the body violated filial piety, yet ophthalmic surgery became an elite exception. But this is if you think about it from more of an analytical perspective, it's because this sense of foreign prestige. Indian Buddhist medicine carried enormous cultural capita in Tang China, and documented success stories generated sufficient cognitive dissonance to even completely override even deep cultural resistance. And this kind of concept of foreign prestige, we'll see it even today in identical dynamics with acupuncture, for example. Acupuncture's legitimization in the United States after the 1970s was driven primarily by geopolitical shifts after Nixon's opening to China, but not by improved evidence. And that's really at the core of it. It's about how it's being perceived rather than empirical evidence. But how are these drugs implemented? And this is where it gets kind of interesting. Foreign drugs rarely kept their original therapeutic applications. This indication shift is showing what that epistemological work of domestication really means, how it's adapted to local context. Take frankincense. In Persian medicine, it was used as a digestive stimulant, but in China, it was completely re-theorized as blood activating, pain relieving, and it was kind of mapped onto key blood frameworks that the Chinese had, and or saffron, for example, a Persian cardiac tonic and mood enhancer that became in China a powerful blood-moving drug for fertility. And this reveals another fundamental principle: translation always transforms. The substance is chemically identical, but its medical meaning was completely reconstructed. And that is what leads to this hybrid knowledge. It's materially foreign, but epistemologically still Chinese. So now, let's return to the framework, the feedback loops. So looking at these examples, 3 key insights emerge. First, pharmacopoeias are non-static. They're constantly evolving. Second, traditional is always perceptive fed, and the Ming physician using frankincense believed he was practicing pure Chinese medicine, and yet he was deploying and using Arabian herbs that had been domesticated with the previous 500 years. Third, syncretism is the historical norm. Claims of purity are just political sort of labels and are imposed retrospectively. But there's also this kind of really important contemporary difference. During the Silk Road period, thousands of figures participated in knowledge transmission: merchants, monks, physicians, patients, etc. But today, pharmaceutical corporations, regulatory agencies, and tech platforms are what's mediating most of these flows, which creates unprecedented possibilities for extraction and monopolization of these medical technologies. This hybridity also produces a contemporary crisis. States are imposing contradictory mandates, for example, TCM might satisfy biomedical validation standards, controlled trials, dose standardization, etc. While simultaneously being preserved as authentic cultural heritage, these demands cannot exist, and this hybridization also destabilizes intellectual property. For example, a turmeric case, which I found really interesting. The University of Mississippi patented turmeric for wound healing in 1955, but it was revoked in 1997 after Indian opposition citing ancient Ayurvedic texts. But this entire framework rests on originalist logic that Silk Road evidence shows doesn't make sense. Turmeric was, documented in ancient India, but traded across Asia for millennia. By the Tang Dynasty, it entered Chinese medicine. Arab physicians incorporated into Unani medicine. So, who owns turmeric knowledge? Or frankincense, geography Arabian, integral to Arabic foundations, but radically repurposed in Chinese medicine. And who deserves benefits sharing? Indian institutions, Chinese hospitals, is what proportion across these 2 millennia, right? And what's actually acquired is not treating medical traditions as knowledge commons requiring collective ownership, collective stewardship, but not property requiring singular ownership. So let me conclude with 4 core claims. First, medical epistemology is hybrid by nature. Pure traditions are not historical realities. Second, translation always transforms. Substances don't carry inherent meaning, but theoretical frameworks do. Third is contemporary policies fail by denying this history. You cannot preserve authentic traditions that were already hybrid while simultaneously forcing them through validation frameworks designed for an entirely different epistemology. Significant gaps remain in what we know, structurally produced by archives that privilege elite male perspectives. And we have partial recovery strategies, archaeology, feminist historiography, but we must be honest about limits. So what does this history demand of us today? 4 principles. First, epistic pluralism. So what that means is recognizing multiple valid ways of producing medical knowledge. Second is regulatory flexibility. Context-dependent systems need validation optimization standards, like biological approaches, comparative effectiveness research allows rigorous assessment without artificial standardization of something as hybrid as TCM. Third is benefit sharing frameworks must acknowledge collective stewardship. If frankincense-derived drugs generate pharmaceutical revenue, benefits should flow back to healthcare systems in Oman, India, and China proportionately. Fourth, temporal realism, acceptance that traditions evolve. Freezing them for authenticity is historically naive and almost like practically harmful. The Silk Road teaches us that knowledge has always been collective. It has been hybrid, it's changed over time, over space, it's been mobile, and our contemporary frameworks must reflect this, that this is a reality, but not impose fictional boundaries retroactively. Thank you.